Hello, Ben Norcott here from theathletecoach.com. So progressing along with our long-term athletic performance videos. If you haven't watched any of these, please go back and take a look after this video if you're very interested. Now, what we're looking at today is part B in this series of the basically the functional development series. So if you watch A, we've let everyone know is that the four key areas of functional development in a collision-based sport are upper body, lower body, and core. And we go into great details in A around the upper body and what you're looking at and based on different training ages. So let's jump straight into our area and we're looking at the lower body. Okay, so the lower body or lower body functional development covers a couple of areas, your ankle and your hip. So we'll go into a little bit more detail in a second around why, but anything that happens in between, say your knee and that type of area, is usually a function of a problem at your hip or your ankle, or a hip and ankle issue can be transferred to a different area. So we want to make sure that everyone's quite robust and has the correct range of motion and is fairly strong in those areas. So if you can remember back, we've got three training areas: the training to train, which is where you're learning; training to compete, which is the intermediate; and training to win, which is progressing into more advanced. Each one of these stages, we do the same thing. We've got some, number one is movement screens. So we videotape movement screens, and it's not an extensive amount of movement screens. We're looking at a few key areas. In fact, you could get your movement screens done, and I'll put some video on that a little bit later if people are interested in 2 minutes. It's really important to video them because then you can actually go back and take a look, and it's a great way of getting a whole squad done quite quickly. So the second thing we'll look at is the multi-directional hip strength, range of motion, and symmetry between your hips. So that sounds complicated, but it's quite easy. We're looking at, say, on each hip, the amount of external rotation or how tight their glutes are at certain angles, how tight and strong the hip flexors are, and so forth. So you can narrow it down to 3 to 4 sort of tests to get an idea of the symmetry of someone. And why that's really important, you can imagine if someone's had an injury before, they might have an asymmetry problem, and that problem just creates a different muscle imbalance rather than actually being a true injury. It's just left over from another area. If someone does a lot of kicking in a game or a goal kicker, they might have some asymmetry problems based around their training. So they might end up tight in one area of their kicking leg and then really quite lax in one area of their kicking leg compared to the other leg. So that can create an asymmetry problem for when you're looking at acceleration, running at high speed, and later on when they're getting fatigued at the back end of training sessions and games. We don't want that symmetry issue to create a problem that could have been prevented. Now, the third stage, we're looking at ankle dorsiflexion, which is a range of motion in your ankle, your traditional calf stretches. So there's a couple that we look at there. And also the symmetry between legs, so the difference between your dorsiflexion on one side and your other side. So if you've, like me, might have had multiple ankle injuries, you know that there's a little bit of a difference between the stretching from your left to your right and so forth. What you really got to do is work on getting that balance within, or that asymmetry as close as possible, so that it doesn't affect your running gait or you don't develop calf problems down the line. Now, when we're looking at calves, you might find that some of your fast guys are particularly tight, but that's a good thing. What we're looking at is their asymmetry, and we try to develop a little bit more range of motion in their dorsiflexion so that they can survive the higher amounts of volume that's required when they move up their levels. So when they're in the training to win stage, they could be training, a couple of double days a week, doing 6 training sessions and playing on the weekend. We've got to make sure that they've got very good calf flexibility to allow them to do that load. Now, on the flip side of that, area 4, we're looking at their calf reactive stiffness, which is how springy someone's calf is. Classic example would be, people that are skipping, where they skip and they're nice and springy and fast. That takes a lot less energy to develop that explosive speed when they're running, compared to someone that basically lands, almost puts a heel on the ground and springs up. And that's a pretty low energy efficient way of running. It's absorbing it. So we've got this almost paradox where we're trying to develop a lot of ankle range of motion so people can survive loads, but we need to develop a lot of reactive stiffness so that they're fast. Also, almost something that is hard, again, to manage, we've got to make sure that they've got really good endurance qualities in their calves so that, again, when they progress up to the higher levels of volume, they can survive their training.